This is That's What I Call Marketing with your host, Conor Byrne.
Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing. I'm your host, Conor Byrne, and of course, this is the podcast where you will hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. We are out and about again today in DMG Media's Space 2 studio, a fantastic facility in the centre of Dublin, with Business Plus and of course our incredible show sponsor, the Indie List CMO Collective, where you'll find a curated range of highly experienced and talented senior marketing specialists that can help accelerate your business growth through marketing. Now, if you're enjoying our episodes, please do rate. You can do it afterwards, okay? The panelists can do the rating afterwards. But it helps us really reach that engaged community of marketers just like you. Before we get into today's show, it would be remiss of me not to mention something very special today in the world of the Indie List. It is co-founder Una Herlihy's birthday today. So very happy birthday to Una. We love sound people and Una is one of the soundest. So back in December, I mentioned in this podcast, or That's What I Call Marketing, that I felt that this was going to be the year of B2B marketing getting a makeover and the end of mind-numbingly boring creative for B2B marketing. And a report from Brand Finance showed that the top 100 B2B brands accounted for 2 trillion in brand value that accounts for 12% of the total business value. Now there's a lot of numbers, but when you put that in context of B2C, it's actually 17%. So the closing this gap would actually be worth 0.9 trillion for the value of B2B brands. So that I think highlights the potential for B2B brands to really elevate their marketing and really close the gap on their B2C peers. So that's what we're here to talk about today. So how can we close the gap on B2C, and do we need to close the gap for B2C? So along with the Indie List Business Plus, we've curated an incredible panel with us today, and let me introduce them to you now. First up, we have Tara O'Sullivan. Tara fell in love with marketing since she read Vance Packard's The Hidden Persuaders at the age of 12, just a couple of years ago, and has pursued a career in marketing since, working in B2B technology, including positions in Oracle, Iona, SAS, TES Global, and she's now Chief Marketing Officer at Zevo Health, the global leader in content moderator well-being, and works with some of the largest tech companies in the globe. And Tara absolutely adores B2B marketing, which we will get into. Next up, we have Caroline Kelly. Caroline is VP of Marketing at Johnson Hanna, the alternative legal service provider disrupting the industry. Johnson Hanna is not just disrupting the model, but approaching B2B marketing in a very different way. And previously, Caroline was Managing Director at Teneo, where she led the digital and creative campaigning division. Next, and our final guest on the panel, we have Seamus Moore. Seamus is the CMO of Atlas, the technology platform that enables innovative companies to employ whoever they want, wherever they want, across the globe. And you do that with your own team as well. They're all over the place. Prior to Atlas, Seamus was the CMO for Groupon and also worked for Paddy Power, O2 and Hewlett Packard. So has both sides of the B2B and B2C world to talk about. So look, I'd love to get started just kind of not getting into, I guess, definitions, but just kind of framing the conversation. When you're talking about B2B marketing to people, Tara, what do you talk about? Like, how do you explain it to them?
So really what I try to think about is that you're basically selling to people. So you're using the same kind of behavioral psychology, but basically they're in teams of other people, in buyer groups, in big organizations. So you're trying to get them thinking about it in terms of how great it's going to be for the organization, but it also is going to be great for them, and how their, star is going to rise because they're buying your product or whatever that is. So it's kind of really around that you still have an individual making a decision, but with usually a much bigger buyer group around.
So, yeah. Caroline, how about you in your organisation and previous roles? How have you kind of talked about B2B marketing?
I think that was very well put. So I think for me, somebody said, I think it was James John actually, shout out to James, who said, forget B2B and B2C, it's H to H, human to human, right? So we're all just human beings at the end of the day. And strong creative content will resonate with the audience. So for me, there are massive differences and then also not so much at times. So I think you're right in terms of, again, maybe being biased. I think it's probably a little bit more complex. Stakeholders definitely come to mind. longer sales cycle in a lot of cases as well. So there's probably a little bit more complexity to it. Again, being a little bit biased by saying that. I have a sister who works in B2C who'll be like,
we're more complex.
Exactly. Yeah.
Seamus, how about you? How are you kind of defining it?
When I think about it, I just think, what keeps your customer or your client awake at night, and use that as your compass. So it's very similar to B2C, but as the lady said, it's a longer process. So you have to figure out where their pain points are, and then how do you message that to them so that it's very relevant to them, and get the conversation starting from there.
So, Carol, you mentioned there kind of the differences and similarities, and you've seen both sides. How do you think specifically about the differences? What are the differences for B2B marketing over B2C?
I suppose, and we'll probably go into it in a lot more detail, but I do think when it comes to B2B, there is a more sales orientated approach or mindset. I think B2C and generally maybe it's the organizations I've worked with have been more siloed in, you have your brand marketing and you have your communications divisions and you have your sales team. And oftentimes, there can be gaps in communication between some of those. And I think that's the really big challenge in B2C, is making sure all of those pieces are working together. Whereas I find with B2B, the marketing team are much more involved in that sales process and very much plugged into the process of, lead generation and also, not taking from brand marketing. They're obviously involved in that as well. But I think the dynamic shift is more that you're looking at the revenue at the end of the day. You're probably not as siloed, whether it's in brand or comms or what other space,
Seamus, you've kind of been both as well. Was there a moment for you where you kind of noticed the difference in the sense of like that? I remember when I was working in more brand roles and then I got closer to sales and I was in sales meetings and I was hearing things they were saying and I was like, oh my God, nobody in marketing is thinking.
Knows that.
Were any moments like that where you kind of go, now I know the difference between B2B and B2C?
Yeah, like I came from Groupon, which was very consumer focused, obviously. Like we had a merchant marketing division, but like when I went into B2B, I found that I had all these ideas where I wanted to develop propositions and show a vision of this is what the brand would look like in a year or 2 years time. But salespeople just want something. They've a meeting tomorrow. They've a pitch. Give me collateral right now. And it's this. The marketing cycle is shorter, but the sales cycle is longer. So so many touch points between when you decide, okay, we're going after this target list to when you sign it. So you're integrated with them so much more, but like the cycle is more competitive at the start. It's very in your face and different than consumer, where you can step back, think about it, come up with the propositions and present them to the team. Whereas with B2B, you're very much in the team right there and you're fighting to get this as quickly as you can. So yeah, there's definitely a difference.
It's huge, and I want to get more into the dynamic with sales maybe a bit later on. Yeah. But I mean, Tara, from you, someone who is self-confessed
born and bred
lover of B2B marketing.
Since I was a kid. Yeah.
When for you, what do you see as kind of fundamental core differences? I think you mentioned them as kind of somehow you define it.
Yeah. So I think the big piece for me that I think is changing with B2B is that the people are no longer really trusting the salespeople, right? So they reckon now marketing owns 67% of the sales cycle in B2B, right? Which is phenomenal length of duration of the sales cycle, right? And that's probably that was the last time the research was done, which was in 2022. That's probably at 73% now. And they want to talk to a salesperson once they've almost made the decision, right? So actually it's marketing that is giving them the correct level of content, making sure they're seeing objective content from analysts and stuff like that, so that decision is being impacted in the right way so that it goes your way, right? So I think marketing owning so much of the sales cycle is just a huge change in B2B. So what you were saying there is that B2B is going to have its coming out party is so true, because sales, for a long time, their enterprise sales was seen as a bad thing and they didn't want to trust. So all salespeople are being renamed as directors of trust and safety, like our salespeople are, and really important things. And they're really well trained now. Salespeople are really well trained in the areas you're in, because they're seen, they cannot go in and just sell.
One of the things definitely we see is a lot more evidence around, people wanting self-directed,
Absolutely,
information finding and seeking, which is very different, I think, to, maybe it's not, it's probably the same as B2C, because if you're buying particularly a high-priced purchase, like a new car, you'll do a lot of that research yourself. And so that's a huge amount of the role, maybe, kind of, you see that changing for B2B marketers.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And, I'm actually not that long in the role I'm in, and I feel like I've been sprinting because the content, you're just trying to get it out there, because there is such an onus on that to bring in leads and to supply customers what we need. So I think, in 3 months we've had 3 white papers turned around and, out. So it's rapid pace,
Absolutely.
Because the demand is there, and so you're trying to keep up with that. That is definitely, I think, different to B2C, where maybe you're in more of a campaigning cycle, where you might have looked at the year ahead and you're kind of thinking, oh, what are we doing for the summer period, and so I think there's probably a little bit of a shift there in planning.
Yeah, and then the quality, I think, making sure that you're putting stuff out that's of value, right?
And I think the other thing is it's more measurable now. So you find, like, for me, I'm not your typical marketer. I have an engineering degree, so my
yeah, I know. Here, listen, I have a hospitality degree. We're gone.
So I think the way I think about it is very process driven and this is the performance marketing metrics. But the CFOs of the business, it's easier to talk to them now because you can talk about return on investment and cost per lead and all that kind of side of it. Whereas 10 years ago, that wasn't in the conversation at all. So they're coming to marketing more now to talk about, where's the value for money? Do I hire another sales development rep, or do I put that investment into marketing? And marketing was way more measurable now. And that's come from the consumer world. So there is a kind of meshing between the two. And, like, at the end of the day, we're all consumers. So we all consume the same amount of content. So it's turning more to the fun side of marketing now.
So that brings me then to maybe one of the key points that we hear about B2B marketing. Again, like I said, it could be mind-numbingly boring. I saw something today that said it's like someone put a PowerPoint presentation on the back of The Economist. Like, that's we try to do. We try say everything. And I think Business Plus in their research said 60% of people felt B2B advertising could be more appealing. Right? So that's a lot of people that are like, this is boring, it's not interesting, it doesn't engage me. How have we got there, Tara, do you think? And is it a problem?
Absolutely it's a problem, because I think even the fact that, you're just talking about that advertising piece, there's the average person, when they're making a decision at B2B, takes 13 different pieces of content or something like that. And there's between 7 and 8 people making part of the decision. So you're talking about 13 different pieces of content for each of those 7 or 8 people, which is hundreds of pieces of content, like you were talking about, that you've done 3 ebooks in the last, 3 months. I think it's a huge problem that they're trying to say everything like you say. And there isn't a sense of, they're talking, to Seamus's point, to the customer pain points. They're saying, here's our product, here's all the cool stuff it can do, here's feature function. Whereas actually nobody cares about that. If you can't get into their brain with what they're waking up and worrying about in the morning, they're not going to pay attention to anything you're doing.
Yeah, and so the debate then of creativity versus utility, right? And it's the inward out, where we've got a list of, product features that we feel we need to tell people about, because the guy who built or woman that built the product is like, these are we're going to change people's lives, tell them about the widget.
Exactly.
Caroline, what's your view on the creativity utility debate? Where do you sit on that?
I'm strongly supportive of creativity. And I think probably actually, coming back to the B2B, B2C, I always talk about fun and function. And I think probably as a rule of thumb, it's kind of 70-30 fun, function when you look at B2C, and it's the opposite when you look at B2B. I've been very fortunate. I walked into a business where it's the legal industry.
So interesting.
And that's
They're known as a category.
Said. People were like, "You're doing what?" And I was like, "No, don't worry about it. It's cool. I've talked to them. They're up for this." So I've been very fortunate. I have a CEO who gets it, like is like off you go, you know, and even if you look at, say, our brand in comparison to the rest of the legal industry, it's colourful, it's very different, so we had a big brand campaign pre-Christmas, and like that was really like it was a brave move, because you know there's a board and they're kind of again saying, okay, well, what's the ROI going to be like on this? And you know, you go back to those B2B metrics, and it was trying to push us out of just lead gen. Like, okay, that's fine, but if the brand awareness and the education isn't there, you're not going to get those warm leads to even consider the content piece that we're pouring money into. So no, I strongly believe in creativity, and for anyone who hasn't seen it, I mean, we had like big orange billboards with happy faces on them. It's just not really what you consider, but the feedback was incredible from clients and inquiries off the back of that. So it really was about just trying to stand out in what it's maybe considered a slightly boring category.
Very, but it did stand out. I remember seeing it, and it did, like, I think it stood out so well that I was like, I hadn't heard of them before.
Exactly.
I was like, who's this? And I was like, who's doing this work? Like, really annoying, I'm so good. Seamus, in your world in Atlas, like it's sometimes it's kind of a complex enough proposition to get out there. I mean, can creativity do it alone? Because there's a lot of tax implications for EORs, all that kind of stuff. Like that's challenging to get across in a.
Yeah, and even like the fact of the matter is nobody knows what EOR is. So EOR is employer of record. So it basically means I can hire somebody anywhere in the world. I don't have to worry about where they are. Like Atlas will sort that for you. And like to get that cut through is huge, because all our competitors are doing it and there's no differentiation. So our core differentiator is our people, and that's what we're striving to be and have fun advertising around it. But the fact of the matter is, like, if you switched our brand for a competitor brand on websites, we'd look exactly the same, because we're talking about the same things. So you have to then think about, how do I get into people's heads? You've 15 seconds to get into their head and figure out, okay, they have an interest. And at the end of the day, what I love about my job is, like, my job is fully remote. I have people all over the world, but like, that's the way industry is going. So we give the ability to retain and acquire talent anywhere in the world. So for me, that's exciting. Like, I don't want to go back to an office. So selling that is a joy, because I live it. So you have to try and figure out how do you differentiate, because the marketplace out there is pretty much all the same. So for B2B, that's the exciting part now, to try and get to the next stage of consumerism as such.
And moving out of, again, I was reading something about the number of tech brands that were blue, I worked for one, and it was like, but then often the work you could just rebadge, put somebody else on. It was, I think, the worst demonstration of it was during COVID, when everyone was around the world to help, and it was like, do you remember that ad that was like all the ads put together? That's and it was like the same piano track. Could be for anybody. That is a challenge in B2B. And Tara, you were saying to me that your addressable market audience sizing is reasonably tight and small and well defined. So in that sense, how do you find the role for creativity? Because that almost suggests, well, actually, because who they are, door-to-door sales, or it's stalking them.
So what we do, there's a bit of stalking, certainly, and there's a bit of door-to-door sales, but mainly it is personalizing the message to them. So account-based marketing we use it a lot in our world, because there's different reasons people would want our services, and those reasons are dependent on what challenges they have getting back to the pain. So there's lots of new legislation coming up about what you can and can do with content moderators and how you have to treat them. There's people being sued by content moderators because of the PTSD they've had looking at content through their, so like somebody sued them for 52 million successfully last year. So at board levels all over, so it's a little bit like when Me Too came out, lots of people were asking at board levels, do we have really good compliance training, or is it just tick box stuff? So do you have really good well-being for your content moderators, or is it just tick box? So it's pushing out stuff that they're going to care about, because they're being asked those questions in boardrooms or whatever that is,
Again, that's a hard thing to like.
Absolutely.
How I guess the customer insights must be a huge part of what you're.
It is, and we get really personalized with regards to landing pages for the individual people in individual accounts. Right. So for the CFO or the chief risk officer, there'll be one story for them with their logo on it and even potentially their name. So we get down to a really, really, really deep level of personalization based on either stuff that's come up in the press or annual report information or anything like that, basically.
So you're
absolutely anything like that, that goes really, because there are 230,000 content moderators in the world, and there's about 272 companies who employ content moderators. Right. So it's like I've gone from where I've been trying to make a multi-billion-dollar market all the way to this, which is a tiny group of people in the B2B sense of the word that need to be protected. And so we get really, really specific. But at the same time, lots of people don't know about content moderator well-being. They don't realize it's a thing you need. And so there's a whole industry creation thing, which you know all about, that you're basically trying to come in on and explain why this is so imperative to your brand, to your share price even, depending on what comes out about it, right? So
it's almost creating a category.
You are
right.
recreating a category. Wow. Yeah. So it's really exciting.
That is exciting. And just sorry, before I get on to another topic, but I'd just be curious. You went from something that was quite big in scale to something much, much smaller. What did you have to change or shift in your approach?
So in the previous places, there was some budget that was allowed for kind of, let's see if it works. Okay. Whereas we've got a small amount of funding and we want to make sure that pretty much everything is ROI-able. Okay. So if we're doing brand work, we make sure, to your point, it's really measurable. We make sure that if we're going to an event or anything like that, so we're in an event at the moment in London, we have 26 meetings with 37 people before anybody got on a plane. Right. So if anybody rocks on up to us on the show, awesome. We have speaking opportunities there. So everything is done way in advance. So you have account plans before you go in. So you know exactly who you're talking to and what their concern is going to be.
Machine.
Yeah, it is a machine. It is at this level, whereas before I would have been at this level, right? Yeah. Whereas this is at an account buying level. We know the compliance officer's been asking you this. We know the CEO is worried about this. Are we going to get sued like what happened last year with the other people? So it's really cool.
And that's where the change has been. Like if you look at events, like we have events all the time.
500 grand.
Like we've an event in Vegas in May timeframe, and people are going, let's go to Vegas, let's go to a show, let's do all this, and you're like, no, hold on a second, this is my budget. How many meetings have you scheduled? How are we going to get the return on investment on that? So like Tara said, you have to be micro level. Say we've got 30 meetings with these 20 people, they were on a target list over here, we got them, now you have to convert them and then follow back after 2 months and go, did you do it or not? And then if they didn't do it, we're not going to that event next year. That's the level that you're at, and it's in partnership with sales that you do it. But like that's the difficulty for B2B marketing, because your investment, marketing is always the place they cut budget from first. So your investment levels are so tight that you have to have a ROI on every single thing you do. And then you become that person that goes, I'm not spending on that because this is the data from last year, we're not doing it.
Today's show is brought to you by the Indie List CMO Collective. This service from the Indie List provides you with access to a curated range of highly experienced and talented senior marketing specialists. Visit theindielist.ie to find out more.
Are you facing the maze of global expansion? Diplomat introduces the diplomacy model, a cost-effective, innovative approach to navigating the complexities of your brand's presence in international markets. Visit diplomat.agency.
If you would like to reach an engaged community of marketing leaders, get in touch with That's What I Call Marketing to discuss sponsorship opportunities.
And I remember my first big event, which was years ago, and it was, you rocked up, you had the best swag, loads of people at booth babes, believe it or not. They had magicians, or they had, like, it was just horrific stuff. And so if you had the best like tchotchke out in front or the t-shirt gun, I'm not joking you And you got all those leads and you got on the plane home and you typed all those leads in, and that was the thing. Whereas that is like, we call them trick-or-treaters, and if they rock on up, happy days, we don't give a shit about them because they are not the people we want to talk to. The people we want to talk to are the 37 of the 26 meetings we're doing.
Actually, I remember I was I went to Cannes, it was 2 or 3 years ago, but I met somebody, it was amazing. I met somebody.
Just saying, we Vegas, Cannes. Up to great.
But like that, somebody booked a meeting with me and I met him and I said to him, you know, oh, what are you making of the shows? And he was like, I didn't book a ticket, I'm just here for meetings. Like just 9 to 9 every day, himself and 2 other people in a little cafe.
Yeah.
Boom, boom, boom.
Absolutely.
You know, and it was clever.
And they'll probably do way better than the people who spent $1 million. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's incredible.
We touched on metrics and measuring, and I do think that can be it's part of the debate, right? Like, what are the metrics that matter? What are the ones that are really important? So is it lead gen, conversion rates? Is it brand health metrics? Is it both? Because I know from a sales perspective, if you went and said, well, guess what? We've increased our awareness by 12 points and our consideration is up by 3.
Yeah.
They were like, I don't give a flying.
Yeah, don't care.
Yeah. So
and it's very
different. Like if you look at the funnel, the funnel is measured from start to finish, and like there is 13 to 30 touch points across all those funnels. And like when I look at success, I look at how many opportunities have we brought into the funnel? Are they signed off? Yes or no? And then what the conversion rate is on them. So it's very metric driven. But on the side of that, the board now looks for brand metrics as well. How are we doing? What's our share of voice? Like that, I've heard that for the first time this year. Really? And that's a real consumer thing. So they are getting interested because they realise that there's no differentiation out there. So at least if there's you're being talked about and you're in PR and you're getting news articles written about you, okay, that's great. So there is definitely a move towards more consumer metrics. And it is very measurable.
I was actually at a talk yesterday in LinkedIn and they threw out a stat, something I think it was 84% of B2B marketers said measurement was the number one focus in 2024. That they were being really not hounded is the wrong word, but like that was
hounded, absolutely
hounded around measurement. And I think it's you're right, ultimately revenue is what keeps a business afloat. It's it's the one that we're going to be asked about, but you have to think about the tomorrow of the brand as well, and I think that's where the brand awareness comes in. So it has to be a mix of the two.
And you mentioned that leads is a big part of your ebooks or thought leadership, but also the kind of the brand campaign solely. Did that help when the brand campaign went out and you were getting inquiries?
Absolutely, it did. We had people who were saying like that, I hadn't heard of you, and we were going, because you think you're doing all the right things, and then a billboard on the drive-in from Clontarf.
Absolutely, that's what you need. Yeah, exactly.
So we had people who were seeing us for the first time, and then we also had clients who we'd worked with in the past who saw it and said, God, you know what, and you've slipped from mind, and I saw the thing, and actually, so there was a little bit of a mix of repeat custom or elevated custom, and then and new customers as well, which was amazing.
And then the conversations that you were having then with the senior leadership in the company, had they come from a background of any B2C, or how were they kind of so open to it?
No, and they'll say themselves, and it was a big consideration going into the role. I was really aware, okay, I have a leadership team who were literally themselves putting their hands up and saying, we don't know anything about marketing. And you're kind of going,
that's usually not the problem.
A bit of both, because you're kind of going, okay, so,
So you're teaching them 101 while trying to
a little
do
bit,
a PhD.
Yeah. So, and then also it's kind of like, you don't want to start a conversation with what you're not, but it's like, just so you know, marketing, like I'm not a designer. It's kind of, there could be people who kind of think, marketing, should we hire her?
Exactly.
So a little bit of both, but no, they were, like I said, a super team, and I made sure when I was joining that I had those conversations in advance, and that the trust was there, and that there was a willingness to experiment and try these things, and thankfully it paid dividends. So we're thumbs up on that one, which is great.
Well, it's a hugely important thing to get but if you're educating people, how did you go about doing that? But I don't mean educating, that sounds really patronising to them, but like how are you bringing them information?
Like data, you know, it's just saying like, listen, you know, here's what everything says, you know, that's the research shows us that this is why it works. And, you know, isn't it 4-to-1 is emotive marketing versus functional marketing.
That's right.
You know, Peter Fields, like all these experts out there have, here is the data. So, and then just showing that we've done our due diligence in terms of customer insights and testing, and showing that, you know, okay, it's a risk and it's a spend, but here is what we believe it's going to do for the brand. And like I said, thank God.
They bought it, B, it worked. And here you are.
Very good.
And for your perspective, Tara, with probably a smaller, you know, it's harder to measure, and this is one of the things, again, measurement for B2B is it tends to be a smaller audience. Like even, I spoke to Conor Archibald from Tracksuit, wonderful kind of way of disrupting brand health metrics and measurement, but they don't do B2B. It's B2C because the scale isn't there.
Yeah.
How do you look to measure brand health?
So I kind of think about my budget in 3. So a third is on kind of content and that sort of thing. A third is on lead gen. And then another third is on the thought leadership brand stuff, right? And each of those has measurements that goes off it. But our one massive measurement is revenue brought in by marketing. So it's not even, like in the olden days, we would hand it off at SQL stage, sales qualified lead stage. And then it was like, sayonara bitches, we don't have to look at you again. And that is up to you to sort out. Whereas now it's like actually and I remember even a rule 20 years ago that marketing couldn't talk to an open opportunity, right? Whereas now it's like, we have a whole plan to close and after, that the sales guys get involved in when it's the right time for the salespeople to get involved in. And we hand over when we think it's the right time for them to have a conversation.
Is that must be helping massively in terms of the debate on what B2B marketing is there to do, which is, you know, people saying it's there to drive sales. So how
and a lot of my conversations with people in the organization is explaining these are the 3 things we do. So you'll see the team, you'll see everybody doing these 3 things, and we measure all of those. And this bit over here, thought leadership, don't really worry about that, but you'll see Richard, our CEO, in the news more. You'll see Michelle on panels at events, who's our clinical director. So you'll start to see us being quoted in lots of different places where we were never quoted before, because that's the kind of PR stuff we can do right now, because we're not advertising on the back of obviously buses, you know.
Yeah, which you probably never will.
Absolutely not. That wouldn't make sense because we have a tiny, tiny, tiny market.
And that probably is a very important distinction to make as well. When we talk about often marketing, particularly the brand, people go, oh my God, TV ad person. They just, you know, they want to go write the brief. We'll open on a beach.
Exactly. And that's all ego. That's so ego. Like.
But how do you then get over that challenge, like Seamus, in Europe, where you probably are trying to move to a more consumer view of brand, but make people understand that it's not necessarily, and maybe you will make a TV ad someday, but it's not about, that's not the output.
Yeah, like for me, it's % contribution to the business.
Exactly.
So like, what are we driving? And to Tara's point, like, we used to go to MQL, which is marketing qualified leads, and just hand them off.
Didn't even go to SQL.
Bye-bye.
We're like, our job is done. But then sales would come back and go, the quality is not great. So then we'd go further down the funnel till we're at an opportunity, which is like, they have a meeting, they have a budget, they have a timeline. And then suddenly it's like, oh my God, you're delivering 40-50% of the overall revenue of the business. So then you have an equal footing at the table. Whereas before, that's the crayons and markers department.
Exactly.
They're the guys who, like when I started in B2B marketing was newspaper ads and billboards in local stadiums kind of thing. Yeah. Whereas now it's really more digital and thought leadership, and like, how do you get your leadership team out there talking more so that you're getting the press and they're going, oh my God, now I see it. I'm getting all these likes. And it's kind of ego as well, because they're getting all these likes on their LinkedIn posts and they're going, oh my God, like this is brilliant. And then they're getting the press releases and they're seeing their name out there. So it's more of that now. And like typical PR, we spend not millions, but a lot of money on PR in the last 2 years, and it doesn't really work. So what we've done now is we've gone very tactical with our PR, going to smaller agencies and saying, these are our target lists. And we bring them in-house and show them everything and say, these are the people we're going after. This is the account-based marketing we're doing. Please help us with this. And they get very, very targeted. You just talk to this journalist, not that one, all of that now. So it's way more targeted than it ever was before.
And the space, I think the journalism space has changed and evolved as well. Like, you know, like everything, there's more outlets, there's more places, you know, so it's harder to find and land. Was PR kind of huge PR around the actual in the marketing industry about the campaign, but is that part of your mix as well?
It is, yeah. So, but like that, it's very niche, it's targeted. So the currency, for example, would be, you know, a big one for us, and we're talking to them about doing some work with them.
Business Plus, obviously.
Business Plus would come to mind, top of mind there. And then, you know, what we do get is, you know, we'll make an appointment, and like say Gareth Lamb joined he came in as the strategic advisor last year, and so that's of national broadcast interest, you know, so you get the bigger pieces at those moments in time, which are, you know, like you said, nice to have, but we're not, you know, we're much more about the thought leadership piece as well, and making sure that we're in the right
places. We've talked a lot about sales and the relationship with sales, and again, it's not something so much, and maybe you experience it maybe a bit though too in the retail side of things, where, and maybe probably Caroline, you as well in Tenio from hearing from clients, where yes, there is a kind of a sales element, but in B2B that relationship is really important. But I think for maybe someone starting off in a B2B role, or, you know, B2B marketing starting, where there might be one or two people in marketing in that B2B function, there might be 100 people in sales. The balance is very much in the favor of sales, and they may be listening to this going, I know all these things, I know these things I need to be doing, but there's one of me, and that sales people are just asking me for the leads. Tara, what would your advice be?
So one of the things that I always say to people when I join a place is that we are not sales' bitch, and we kind of have it written down, and it's like a thing we talk about at the beginning of meetings, and no is a full sentence, right? And so there are certain things that we will not do because that is not our job, because an awful lot of people, marketing has a lot of women in it, and so they're seen as they take the notes, they, you know, make the coffee, all that kind of stuff. So we've stopped all of that, luckily. And so no is a complete sentence. And if it's not impacting, you know, one of those things that we do, then we're not going to be involved in it.
Yeah.
Seamus.
Yeah, like it's so funny. Like I talked about the crayon.
Not sales' bitch.
But it's exactly like that. Like we get requests in to do name badges and all this kind of stuff, and they're like, does it drive? You can really turn around now and go, does it drive revenue, yes or no? And to that point, like I've been in toxic relationships with sales where like just doesn't work at all. So the most important thing for me is to have a really good relationship with the sales leader and really understand his targets as well as our targets, and start that relationship from the start to say like, where's your pain points? How can we help you? But to that point, we're not your bitch. So respect us, and no is absolutely okay. So you have to build that relationship with sales to make sure that you're working together, because we no longer just throw it over the fence and say it's your job now.
There's probably a bit of that, and I certainly have had experiences before where, you know, say we should do this, we should do this. And you're like, yep, we should.
And like everybody has an opinion on marketing. Everybody. Like when it comes to colours, when it comes to everything marketing, everybody has an opinion. But you have to pull them back and say, okay, this is our decision, and these decisions were the reasons why. And have that really good working relationship with them.
And I think understanding the trade-offs as well. You know, because again, if you go back to the events, when I remember being at an event in London, and the next day the sales leader was like, that was amazing. Like, we should do one of those a month. I was like, do you have any idea how much that costs? And he'd been in the business a while, and he was like, no.
And cost is one thing, the time and the effort.
Exactly. But that was it. I think these things are like 12 weeks to plan, 40 grand. He's like, oh yeah, let's not do that.
And like
any of them. He'd like cancel them all. Exactly.
If you do a big event, the booth in a big event is the size of a small house. Like you could spend 100 grand on a booth. And like it lasts 3 days. it lasts 3 days and you never see it again.
No.
Like I was like, oh, we can use that again somewhere else, and you can't.
Yeah, I thought that as well.
So like 90 grand for a booth. So you have to make sure you're working at that event to make it worthwhile. So
I had a great manager once, and she said, instead of us being small at all these little events, let's be the biggest.
Go big or go home. Yeah,
big at
absolutely.
one, and just be there. And I was like, all right, they're there, and they had the biggest. And I've seen others do that recently at events. I'm like,
it's a much better
smart.
strategy.
Like, it's
much
smart.
better.
And then you do your make sure you've got 20 meetings.
Yeah, there's more focus as the team on this one big thing that we're doing. Yeah.
And everybody goes, and you've the trick-or-treaters are taken care of by whoever, but the main focus, everybody knows it's like the 20 meetings that we're having, and you get a speaking opportunity, and it's a whole, you're owning the show. Like, that's what you want to do.
Yeah, you got to push hard when you go to events. Say, I want to be on the main stage. I have a topic that I want to talk about.
Exactly. That is not a sales pitch.
Yeah.
And won't be by a salesperson.
Yeah.
Exactly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's hugely important.
You're thought leaders, and from your perspective with the sales team, and what was the dynamic again? Can you renew to marketing?
I feel like I'm coming in and being like, everything is great. But, I've been so lucky. I suppose before I joined, there was a little bit of marketing done, and then we were able to. We had a funding round last year, so there was a little bit more budget available. I was brought in, and so I suppose our sales team were like, brilliant, great, and they've been nothing but helpful in terms of just like that. You think in agency, coming from today, I was like, I've kind of touched on most industries, and then I went for a job in one industry that I don't think I've ever done any work in whatsoever, which is legal, and I was going, okay. So they were super in terms of just drilling them for, okay, who is our audience though? Are we skewing male, female, age range? Where obviously industries that are big for us. So just understanding all of that, and I think when you ask the right questions, they kind of start to go, okay, she's going to help us. She's part of this, and just also then understanding like what's working well, what messaging are we using. We've been really, really lucky, and I think what we have to do now is listening to you talking about ABM, but getting much more granular, closing the loop as well in terms of communication and reporting. So that's kind of my focus really in Q2 is getting a little bit more granular and focusing on that.
But I think it's interesting. You have to. There's stages and steps, right? Do you know what I mean? Like you have to go and say, right, what are the things we can do now that are going to be useful, helpful, but also get us on a path for, creating future demand, which James Herman, I love that phrase, like capture current demand, create future demand. It's a very helpful way of thinking about it, and actually doing the right things. And I think it was Direct Line when, I can't think of his name, the really famous CMO from there. And when he went in there, they were very much direct response business, but he knew they needed to build a brand. Yeah. And he did that almost on the side.
Exactly.
Keep reporting on these performance metrics, these lead metrics, but this bit I'm going to work on. And then over time, you'll see that it works.
This is going to deliver even more than this does.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Getting into the conversation of budgets, without how much do you spend, how do you think about the split then? Because, is it 60-40? Is it like 95% of your buyers aren't in market now? Like, how are you thinking about that, Tara? Percentages is fine.
Yeah, 33% on content, 33% on literally on leads, and 33% on thought leadership. That's what we do. And basically the content can be everything from using an analyst to get a white paper, or paying somebody to speak on behalf of ours. Like you were talking about Pure earlier. The thing I love about Pure now is that, like when I started, it was Gartner, IDC, Forrester with the analysts. Now there's probably 30 analyst firms you can go to. Some of them are pay for play, which is freaking awesome. If you want them to write something about you, versus Gartner, which is absolutely, there's no, connection between editorial and advertorial. So we make sure that kind of each of those has a piece of the spend, basically 33% across the board. Because a lot of what we're doing at the moment is trying to create that new market. So there's a lot of work needed around the content
just
side
explaining
of things.
what the problem is.
Exactly. Why you should be worried in losing sleep.
Yeah. Send it sleep mask. Direct mail. There you go. That's the new one. That's free. That's free.
I must write that down.
do love direct mail. Caroline, how do you think about the split of your budgets?
I do generally kind of think of it as brand and product, you know. So I suppose I kind of came in October. We had this big brand awareness piece, and now, so that was obviously a large chunk of our budget at the back end of last year. And I think the way I work is generally then the follow up with the product. Yeah. So right now I'm really heavy in product, and then that will flip again. Like, so I think it's always moving, really. But you know, you're kind of watching. What we should be probably 60-40 on brand and product, because we are still building awareness.
Of course.
But it moves depending on where we are.
And you were really lucky to be able to do the brand stuff first.
Yeah.
Like that you weren't having to do product first and then.
But I was also saying, I wish I was 6 months into the role.
I wish I was 6 months, you know.
But,
of course. It's never perfect.
Exactly.
But you probably, if you were, you might have gotten too deep into the
Very
product
possibly.
and not gone.
Yeah.
And, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because
very possibly.
the freshness probably allowed you to just give that perspective
I
on
would
it.
totally agree. I totally agree. Yeah.
No, it's true.
Seamus, what's your split?
Ours
Vegas
is different.
obviously 25%.
Ours is a little bit different in terms, the splits are right, but I have a team in APAC that our market in China is huge. So we spend like 60% of our budget in China on events only.
Oh, wow.
Because culturally, they need to meet people, they need to shake hands. And like when we sign deals in APAC, for example, there's signing ceremonies. Yeah. Like it's a huge cultural thing. So when I came into the role first, that was hard to understand, because in Europe we spend 60% of our budget on digital, and less to 40% then on brand. So we mix it throughout the world. But like, it's really interesting that APAC is so people focused, and you have to meet the CEOs, shake their hands and do all that. So the split is different. And like last year, we did a big rebrand in 2022. So the first half of last year was all about educating the market. And like, that worked to a certain degree. We got so many leads in, but they weren't right for then. They're right for now, which is brilliant. They're ready to buy now.
Okay.
So this year we've twisted it to go really micro-focused in the countries that we want to attack and use the budgets there, rather than going really wide with the budget that we had. So so it's working better. But content is a huge part of it, and we're lucky we have our own content writers in-house. So we have loads of content. It's the first time in a long time that I can turn around and go, I have no worries on content.
Right, okay.
Because that's always the thing for B2B. You need so much content and fresh stuff. So that's a huge benefit to us now, because now we can actually focus on the brand and what's the next evolution of that brand.
Yeah, and even that, I think we spoke about this before, where like actually deciding the markets. You know, the whole world is your market.
Yeah.
Especially in EOR, but like when it's not, you know, you don't have the budgets for the whole world. How do you decide where to go? And then the cultural nuances
really
of different markets is like, it's a fascinating complexity. I think all, you know, B2B and B2C both have that, but it's really interesting.
Like for our brand, we did a huge amount of work on, the brand is American, but it had to feel like when you were in Hong Kong or Singapore that it was a Singaporean or Hong Kong brand, and the same in the UK and Ireland. So the brand has little nuances throughout the world, but overall it's one brand. But if you're in each of those countries, you'd think it's from that country. So,
very good.
Yeah. Just on thought leadership, because you just mentioned it there, but like there is kind of lots of stats out there about thought leadership, and it was the State of Content Marketing report. 75% of companies believe their content is useful. However, 62% of decision makers ignore the content they encounter. Yet people are spending, C-suite are spending at least an hour a week reading thought leadership content, and it's a beast. It's a machine to try to get it right. Are there any things you've done that have enabled you to get it right?
Yeah, I think we have lots of different people writing. So if you think about the way we lay it out is we have the personas we're trying to sell to, and then we have the funnel, and we literally put in the pieces of content we have in each of those sections for each of those personas, for each of those funnels. So towards the end of the funnel, they don't want to hear from you, they want to hear from your customers, and they want to hear from analysts, from objective, right? So people who love you, and then analysts. So we make sure that the bottom of the funnel for everybody includes pieces around that with different flavors depending on which persona you're talking about. And then all of the top of the funnel, there's just tons of stuff you need for that to kind of bring people in. But we actually map it out by persona across the board based on the various stages.
And then is it all internal? Like,
I believe in B2B a lot of the content is IP. It's your intellectual property, and it has to be internal. Right. I think design can be outsourced to a certain extent, but actually the turnaround is so fast for the PowerPoint decks or the one pages that they need. I actually love having design. I'm lucky enough to have it in-house in Zevo, but I think the focus for content in B2B, it has to be internal.
Again, it's so complex.
Yeah.
You know, to try and expect somebody outside
a writer to get it. Yeah, no,
it's hard.
It's too hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can use writers for like a white paper on X.
Yes.
And you give them a brief, but you're right, like when it comes to your own content, you have to own it.
Yeah.
And you have to know the ins and outs of it, so that when a salesperson sits in front of a client, that they have that content and it's true to your brand.
And it's your tone and it's the way you speak, and it all sounds the same rather than, whereas I think actually we use outside writers a lot, especially like really well-known people to write things for us or to give us ideas for how we should be talking about stuff. But we have core people who write internally.
And Caroline, because you mentioned you had a lot of, thought leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously it's internal, is it?
Yeah.
And particularly very complex.
Yeah, exactly. So, sort of similar, we have, experts in different product areas. So they will lead it out and then be supported by the marketing team in terms of writing, format and QC and all research and that sort of thing to support them where we can to help get it across the line. But yeah, coming back to the thought leadership piece, then again, it's exactly that. It's who can speak with authority on X, Y, or Z, whether it's discovery or in my world or,
exactly.
Then the larger brand piece, obviously we have our CEO, Dan, who is so passionate, who founded the business, who can speak about why he, wanted to disrupt the legal landscape. So it's just finding, what are we talking about and who then makes sense and making sure that they're comfortable as well, Well,
that's the other thing.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that you shouldn't be pushing people in front of anybody if they don't want to. So some people want to write, some people are backroom people, they never want to be seen. So you have to make sure you get the right person to actually.
And I think as well, parameters, people were saying, I'm totally up for it, but what am I allowed to, like, what should I say? Like, what do you want me to say? Or, because if you haven't experienced in that stage, like when I came in, there was kind of putting together tone of voice documents and brand strategy documents and content pillars. And, it was all new. So it's been a big kind of journey that we've been on, to use a tired phrase.
But it is interesting because like the thought leadership again doesn't really exist, I think, in B2C as much. You don't have a thought leadership piece on a new car, for example. Right? But that's probably a real core difference between B2B marketing and B2C is the complex nature of the marketing, right? Yeah. And it does have a place. So I think even going back to that earlier point of the role of creativity and utility, they both have a place, right? I think that's fair to say. But I think probably I agree or disagree that we've gone too far to utility and complexity, and it's now time to give it the reboot. Seamus, what?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like thought leadership for me, like I kind of hate the word thought leadership, but it's like we're lucky in that we've had two really charismatic CEOs who are willing to go out and sell the business as such. So when it comes to content writing, then it's to the point some people don't want to do it. They don't want to even be seen in front of a camera or on a stage or whatever it is. So you have to tweak it to make sure that it's right for the person that you're trying to get it. Like we want our chief technology officer out there, and we're lucky in that he does want to go out there, but other people can't talk. So you have to say, oh God, he can't go out and talk at all. So you have to be very careful about, because at the end of the day, it's your brand that's out there. And like we've built a brand book from scratch with tone of voice and these are the images you can use and this is what you can say and not say and this is who we are and our values and key messages. And that really helps. It's like a cheat sheet for people before they go out. So.
And that's the stuff that's the pulling in from B2C into B2B that's probably been missing, and probably why, I'm not saying we need to have B2C people move to B2B. I don't think that's right, but how, someone who, again, loves the B2B trade, like how do we get more people going, actually, a B2B CMO role is the path to money? Because you wouldn't normally, like if you say to somebody in college in Ireland, you know, you're doing marketing, they want to be, I'd CMO
Guinness.
of the National Lottery.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know what I mean? 'Cause it's like, it's...
That was everybody in college at me. They all wanted to work for Guinness. Yeah, I think part of it is telling the stories of how, I think marketing in B2B has changed over the last, I've been in it for 24 years. I think it has really changed. We were sales' bitch and now we're not. There is another kind of, we are really impacting 50% of the business now, right? And that's because sales' star dropped a little bit and they were seen as, you know, that people wanted to do their own research. And also there's this whole self thing where people want to do their own research and be seen that it's their decision and all that kind of stuff. So it is very different. So I think telling the story and getting more case study, like I remember just doing case study after case study in college of B2C brands. There was never a B2B story ever. And I think doing more of that is really important and teaching the differences, but also the similarities around it.
Yeah, and it can be really interesting. Like, you know,
oh my God,
yeah.
It's so interesting. I brought over the guy who did the first open heart surgery to launch serious illness cover in Ireland back in the 80s, I think. It was incredible.
Yeah.
Like, it was amazing. But like, everybody wants to work for Diageo, or you know what I mean? That's what they want.
I was just going to say on creativity, you know, like formats, like there's like copy, like there's like loads of ways to be creative, you know. You don't have to have huge marketing budgets. Like, I think creativity is the way you just not just express things, but how you think about how you're putting it out in the world. Like really simple things like using infographics instead of one big long white paper that maybe not everyone's going to read, or you know, carousels, whatever it is, you know, like just thinking and experimentation is so important as well, you know, so optimizing as you go and having a bit of a play around.
Yeah, and that's fun. Like experimenting is incredible fun. I know it can sound like, you know, it's small, minute things, but like we did that, you know, a couple of years. I worked in experimentation lab. It was called. I actually didn't want to feel white coat. But we found stuff that just wasn't. Like we found we were cannibalizing our own audience on Facebook. Like we were saving money. It was like this is incredible.
That is brilliant.
And like if you look at it, like there's brands now that are cool. Like if you look at it, like HubSpot, Salesforce, like they've changed the way industry looks at B2B. So now all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, that's a funky brand. I want to work for them. Whereas 20 years ago there wasn't that. It was very blue collar, boring. Let's go to an event. Let's talk to a director of whatever. So it's not that anymore.
Not to get totally, you know, the mission as well, but I do think we're lucky, the three of us sitting here, that we, you know, I like to think that I work for a brand that genuinely is helping legal industry, you know, and I think we all have that in common. So, you know, you mentioned B2C brands and Diageo, and like it's an amazing brand, you know, but for me I love the idea of, you know, we're doing something somewhat purposeful as well, you know.
Which is
you're not making widgets, you know, you're actually potentially changing somebody's life, which is really cool.
Incredible. You mentioned, we're at the end, but you mentioned, you know, people doing it well, Salesforce, HubSpot. Anyone else pop to mind that you can think of that you're kind of admiring their work from afar?
Ooh, I like what LinkedIn are doing in terms of they've really gone out to market on B2B and what it means, and they're very good at getting people in and talking about their product and what they do. So there's definitely learnings from them. But like there's so many great brands. Like I really love what Salesforce have done because they've made it fun. And like if you look at like Bamboo HR or Greenhouse or any of these, like they're all fun brands now. So the marketplace is definitely different to what it was. And like, it feels like there's more jobs in B2B, particularly in Ireland. So it's a nice space to be in. And you're right, like for me, I love what I'm doing because it's making my life easier in that I can work from home. And that's the service we offer all over the world. So like I never have to do that horrible commute into Dublin.
But it's even the impact it makes on women, people of colour, you know, like the impact being able to be remote has on your ability to have an equitable, it's phenomenal. It is phenomenal.
And not being restricted to talent that is in 25 kilometres. Like it's
radius, it's ridiculous.
It is.
It's brilliant.
It's amazing.
It's really cool.
Well, listen, thank you all for your time today. It was absolutely amazing. So we've given B2B a bit of a reboot, but there's lots of good stuff for B2B marketing. Like it's a positive space to be, and I think you've demonstrated as a panel that it's exciting, it's enjoyable, there's good work can be done.
Brilliant work.
And so thank you so much. So thanks to everybody at Business Plus and Space 2, and of course the Indie List CMO Collective for their support on today's episode. Until the next episode of That's What I Call Marketing, from my host, or from me, the host Conor Byrne, and my panel, Seamus, Caroline and Tara, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Today's show is brought to you by the Indie List CMO Collective. This service from the Indie List provides you with access to a curated range of highly experienced and talented senior marketing specialists. Visit theindielist.ie to find out more.
If you would like to reach an engaged community of marketing leaders, get in touch with That's What I Call Marketing to discuss sponsorship opportunities.
Are you facing the maze of global expansion? Diplomat introduces the diplomacy model, a cost-effective, innovative approach to navigating the complexities of your brand's presence in international markets. Visit diplomat.agency